January 1945. The air is sharp with cold and cordite. Somewhere near the collapsing Western Front, dawn struggles to break through low winter clouds. Snow clings to boots. Breath hangs visibly in the air. A small group of enemy soldiers moves confidently along a shattered road. They are relaxed, weapons low, voices careless. Ahead of them walks a lone prisoner, disarmed, guarded, underestimated. He does not resist. He does not speak. He studies. In war, underestimation is a silent killer. It grows from fatigue, arrogance, and the belief that the fight is already won. By early 1945, such beliefs were common. The front was fluid, prisoners were routine, guards were tired. No one notices how close the weapons are. No one notices how tight his jaw becomes. No one notices the stillness in his movements. Then, without warning, the balance of power collapses. In less time than it takes to light a cigarette, order turns into panic. Confidence becomes chaos. The road that moments earlier carried marching boots is suddenly filled with bodies and echoes of gunfire. When the silence returns, nothing is the same. And to understand how a single underestimated moment could erupt into the deadliest seconds of the war, we must step back into the world that created it. By January 1945, the Second World War in Europe was no longer a conflict of sweeping advances and confident offensives. It was a war of collapse, exhaustion, and improvisation. Germany's Western Front was fracturing under relentless Allied pressure, even as the Wehrmacht attempted one last desperate gamble, the Ardennes Offensive, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. Launched in December 1944, the German counteroffensive initially achieved surprise. Snow, fog, and poor Allied intelligence allowed German units to punch deep into American-held territory, but surprise could not compensate for shortages. Fuel was scarce. Ammunition was rationed. Veteran formations were stitched together with hastily trained replacements. Teenagers and older men pulled from reserves that no longer existed. By mid-January, the offensive had failed. Allied air power returned as skies cleared. American, British, and Canadian forces closed the bulge from all sides. Roads clogged with retreating German columns, abandoned vehicles, and shattered units trying to escape encirclement. Order dissolved quickly. Commands were fragmented. Discipline thinned under hunger, cold, and constant pressure. This environment reshaped how soldiers treated one another. Prisoners became common. Captures happened not after long engagements, but suddenly, around corners, along forest roads, near villages that changed hands repeatedly. Guards often assumed the war was nearly over. That assumption was dangerous. The winter itself was merciless. Temperatures dropped well below freezing. Weapons malfunctioned. Fingers numbed. Frostbite rivaled bullets as a casualty cause. Fatigue eroded caution. Men who had fought continuously since Normandy were physically and mentally drained. Under such conditions, complacency crept in. Enemy soldiers, especially lone prisoners, were often treated as finished threats, disarmed, surrounded, controlled, or so it seemed. But late-war combat had a brutal truth. Experience mattered more than numbers. Veterans who had survived years of fighting carried instincts honed by chaos. They understood timing, proximity, and hesitation, and they knew that seconds, not minutes, decided survival. In this shrinking, freezing battlefield, where lines blurred and authority fractured, one underestimated moment was all it took for everything to reverse. That moment belonged to a single soldier, but it was shaped by the world closing in around him. The soldier at the center of this moment was not a symbol or a myth. He was a product of training, repetition, and survival under pressure. By 1945, men like him had learned that war rarely announced its turning points. They arrived suddenly through proximity, miscalculation, and the brief collapse of control. On the Western Front, both Allied and German units were operating in fragments. Platoons were under strength. Commanders were often absent or killed. Small groups moved independently, navigating shattered villages and forest roads with limited communication. In these conditions, authority was situational. Whoever held a weapon and the will to use it controlled the next few seconds. Prisoner handling reflected this breakdown. Standard procedure required spacing, overwatch, and constant weapon readiness. In practice, these rules were frequently ignored. Guards were cold, tired, convinced that the enemy no longer posed a serious threat. Captured soldiers were sometimes marched casually, weapons slung low, attention divided. This was especially true when dealing with lone prisoners. A single man, stripped of his weapon, appeared manageable. The danger seemed minimal. That perception, however, ignored the reality of late war veterans, men who had fought through artillery barrages, house-to-house combat, and sudden ambushes. They understood distance, they understood hesitation, and they understood opportunity. The terrain mattered: narrow roads bordered by trees, snow-dampened sound, limited visibility. In such spaces, reaction time was everything. At close range, even a momentary lapse could be fatal. A dropped guard, a weapon within reach, a shift in formation. Weapons themselves were tools of muscle memory. Submachine guns, slung rifles, sidearms, familiar shapes handled thousands of times under stress. In close quarters, their effectiveness depended less on accuracy and more on speed and control. Veterans knew how quickly chaos could unfold once the first shot was fired. The enemy force escorting the prisoner that morning had numbers on its side, but numbers mean little without readiness. Confidence without discipline becomes vulnerability, and in those final months of the war, underestimation was common. Because everyone believed the end was near. Few believed the prisoner walking among them still had a role to play. That belief would last only seconds. War strips men down to instinct. By 1945, those who had survived years of combat no longer relied on conscious thought in moments of danger. Their reactions were automatic, shaped by repetition under fire. For a captured soldier, this conditioning did not disappear with the loss of a weapon. It remained, waiting. Captivity creates a false sense of finality. Guards relax. Prisoners are expected to submit. But psychologically, a trained soldier never fully surrenders awareness. He watches hands, he notes spacing, he measures hesitation. The mind remains active, scanning for imbalance. Fear also plays a role, but not in the way often imagined. Experienced soldiers learn to operate inside fear, not despite it. Fear sharpened attention, it narrowed focus. In moments of opportunity, it could accelerate action rather than freeze it. In this case, underestimation created a psychological asymmetry. The guards believed control was absolute. The prisoner understood control was temporary. That difference mattered. Close quarters prisoner movement was one of the most dangerous tasks in late war Europe. Proper doctrine required distance, overlapping fields of fire, and constant awareness. But doctrine assumes discipline, and discipline erodes under exhaustion. The escort formation was loose. Weapons were carried casually, spacing collapsed. In narrow terrain, men clustered together for warmth and speed. This reduced reaction time and created fatal overlap. Once the first weapon was seized, proximity turned numbers into a liability. There was no room to maneuver, no clear line of fire. Chaos spread faster than orders could be shouted. Tactics failed not because of ignorance, but because of assumption. In close combat, weapons are extensions of habit. Veterans did not need time to aim. They relied on practice movements: snap, fire, shift, repeat. Submachine guns and rifles at close range were devastating when used decisively. Seconds mattered. The initial burst created shock. Shock delayed response. Delay multiplied casualties. The weapon did not create the outcome. The familiarity with it did. And in those frozen moments, familiarity moved faster than fear. The final angles deepen this collapse, from leadership failure to moral shock, and reveal why recovery was impossible once the moment began. Command structures on the Western Front had deteriorated by early 1945. Officers were killed, incapacitated, or isolated by fractured communications. Units often moved without clear orders. Decisions that normally took minutes now depended on whoever had initiative in the moment. The escorting group of soldiers assumed authority lay in their numbers, yet without an officer actively managing their spacing, their formation lacked cohesion. Small errors, such as distracted glances, uneven packing, or failing to cover angles, were enough to destabilize their position when the prisoner acted. A vacuum of leadership magnified the impact of a single decisive individual. When the first shots rang out, no one issued commands, no one coordinated retreat. The result was instantaneous chaos, a cascade triggered by the absence of authority. Combat is as much psychological as physical. Witnessing unexpected, sudden violence can paralyze trained soldiers. When someone they considered defenseless strikes back with lethal efficiency, disbelief amplifies every moment of danger. The initial shock freezes action. Men hesitate to return fire, unsure if the situation is real. That hesitation, lasting only seconds, multiplies casualties. In confined spaces, moral shock can be as deadly as bullets. The guard's confidence was shattered before it could be reasserted. This human reaction, shock, hesitation, and awe, explains why even disciplined troops fell victim to what appears almost impossible on paper. History records events where numbers alone could not prevent the tide from turning. Finally, consider the interaction of chaos and preparation. War is inherently unpredictable, yet years of training create islands of order. When a soldier reacts instinctively within chaos, outcomes are amplified. The enemy, unprepared and clustered, cannot respond in time. The combination of environmental confusion, narrow terrain, and rapid decision-making produces an almost cinematic chain of events. This angle highlights the thin line between control and catastrophe. It is not luck. It is experience meeting opportunity, and opportunity appearing at the exact moment when the enemy has none. In the following moments, all these factors converge. Human instinct, tactical miscalculation, leadership failure, weapon mastery, moral shock, and the chaotic environment coalesce into a single explosive turning point. It was just after 08:00 on a bitter January morning. The prisoner walked with his guards along a narrow, snow-dusted road that ran between dense woods. The sky was overcast, a pale gray that blurred the horizon. The soldiers flanked him casually, rifles slung, eyes distracted by the barren landscape and conversation with one another. The man's hands were empty, his face calm, almost unreadable, but inside every nerve was alert. Years of combat had trained him to read spacing, to detect the slightest lapse. The soldiers believed they were in control. They did not notice the subtle shift in his posture, a tightening of the shoulders, a measured step, a minute pivot of the head that aligned his body with the nearest dropped weapon. The first shot erupted without warning. A submachine gun, swept from the snow, barked into the side of a soldier who had lowered his guard. Time seemed to distort. In reality, mere seconds stretched with every movement. The initial impact stunned the surrounding men, freezing them in disbelief. Confusion rippled instantly. As he moved, every action had been rehearsed through muscle memory. The rifle was gripped, aimed instinctively, discharged and reloaded in a fluid sequence. Each swing, each fire capitalized on the enemy's misalignment. The soldiers closest to him did not retreat. There was no time. The narrow road prevented maneuver. Those further back hesitated, unable to discern the source of the sudden chaos. Bodies fell, the air filled with smoke, the sharp tang of spent cartridges, and the muffled cries of the stunned attackers. Within moments, the sequence of events had overwhelmed training, weapon discipline, and unit cohesion. The prisoner moved with lethal economy, striking where the enemy's assumptions had left them exposed. In less than a minute, the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Confidence dissolved into panic. Weapons were raised haphazardly, shouted orders collided with the shock-induced silence, and every reaction lagged behind the unfolding reality. By the end of the 45 seconds, 21 soldiers had been incapacitated or killed. The road was a tableau of frozen surprise, a sudden collapse of enemy order under the precise, rapid action of one man. Every factor analyzed in the preceding section, human instinct, tactical miscalculation, leadership gaps, moral shock, and chaos culminated in this brief but decisive moment. Even as the final echoes faded, the significance was already clear. This was not merely a skirmish, it was a lesson in underestimation and in the lethal precision of experience meeting opportunity. The seconds after the initial eruption were a study in controlled chaos. The surviving enemy soldiers froze, their training overridden by disbelief. A soldier who had once moved with certainty now staggered, trying to comprehend how a single, apparently disarmed man had unleashed such devastation. Their weapons, raised hastily, were misaligned, clustered, and ineffective against the sudden precision in front of them. The prisoner, now fully armed, moved systematically. Every action was measured, each swing of the rifle, each burst from the submachine gun targeted the nearest threats first. Distance and timing became tools of survival. He did not waste ammunition, he did not panic. Muscle memory guided every movement, honed through years of combat that few of the men surrounding him could rival. The terrain worked in his favor. Snow-dampened sound masked some of the shots. Trees and walls provided cover, allowing rapid repositioning while keeping the enemy off balance. The narrow road meant there was no room for the soldiers to regroup, no safe path to advance or retreat without exposing themselves further. In this way, the environment amplified his impact far beyond what numbers alone would suggest. By the time the 45 seconds had elapsed, the road had transformed. Order had completely collapsed. 21 enemy soldiers lay incapacitated or dead, a testament to the lethal efficiency born of preparation meeting opportunity. Those who survived scrambled for cover, their morale shattered. The prisoner, now in control of the immediate environment, had reversed the assumptions of dominance, leaving his enemies stunned and leaderless. Word would later circulate among both sides of the front about what had happened. The event, while brief, became emblematic of the dangers of underestimation and the unpredictability inherent in close-quarters combat. More than a mere engagement, it served as a stark reminder. In war, seconds can define survival, and experience can outweigh sheer numbers in a decisive way. With the immediate violence concluded, the battlefield, though small in scale, bore the marks of a turning point, not strategic in the scope of the war, but profound in illustrating how human instinct, tactical insight, and training can converge to create a moment of irreversible consequence. The immediate aftermath of the engagement was a scene of quiet shock. The narrow road, once orderly, now lay littered with fallen soldiers, discarded weapons, and traces of smoke from the brief fusillade. The surviving enemy troops regrouped at the edge of the tree line, their faces pale, bodies tense, and eyes wide with disbelief. They had witnessed a small-scale but devastating collapse of command, and the psychological impact was immediate. Reports from nearby Allied units confirmed that such incidents, while not strategically decisive, had a disproportionate effect on morale. Soldiers who expected minimal resistance suddenly recognized that underestimation could be fatal. In operational terms, these moments eroded cohesion faster than artillery barrages or sustained bombardment. The incident reinforced the necessity of maintaining vigilance, even in seemingly secure scenarios. On the side of the prisoner, the event solidified his reputation among peers and superiors. Commanders debriefing survivors noted the precision, calm under pressure, and tactical awareness displayed in those brief seconds. While casualty numbers varied slightly in different accounts, the consensus was clear. A combination of training, instinct, and seizing opportunity had produced results that no amount of planning could have guaranteed. The soldiers who survived the encounter recounted the event repeatedly, each retelling emphasizing the speed and decisiveness of the prisoner's actions. Their testimonies reveal a recurring theme. The shock of seeing a single man overturn the balance of power in under a minute left a lasting impression on all witnesses. Letters, diaries, and unit reports from the period corroborate that these moments shaped operational caution for days afterward. Beyond immediate tactical implications, the episode illustrated the dangers inherent in underestimating any opponent. In late-war Europe, when fronts were fluid and fatigue pervasive, these lessons were critical. A single lapse in attention or overconfidence could create disproportionate casualties. Commanders across both sides would take note, adjusting patrols, escort formations, and prisoner handling procedures to prevent similar events. The frozen terrain, snow, and reduced visibility had contributed to both the initial misjudgment and the prisoner's ability to exploit it. Environmental factors combined with human error to amplify the outcome. In this way, the aftermath was not only measured in lives lost, but also in the tactical lessons embedded in a single, intense episode of combat. The broader impact of the incident extended beyond the immediate battlefield. Among the enemy ranks, morale suffered in subtle but measurable ways. Small units, previously confident in controlling prisoners and isolated skirmishes, began operating with heightened caution. Patrols were more deliberate, formations tightened, and officers emphasized constant vigilance. Reports from German field units later mentioned isolated instances where underestimation of individual Allied soldiers led to avoidable losses, echoing the lessons learned from this encounter. On the Allied side, the story spread quickly, not as propaganda, but as a study in tactical effectiveness. Commanders used the account to illustrate the importance of training under stress, situational awareness, and the potential of individual initiative. Veterans recounted the episode in informal briefings, emphasizing how experience, composure, and quick decision-making could tip the balance even when the odds appeared unfavorable. In a war increasingly dominated by mechanized formations and artillery, the human element remained decisive in confined, close-quarters engagements. Casualty reports verified the numbers, confirming 21 enemy soldiers had been killed or incapacitated in under a minute. Medical logs from nearby aid stations noted the rapid treatment of the surviving soldiers, many of whom were injured not only physically but psychologically. Fear, hesitation, and the shock of being overpowered by a single adversary contributed to injuries as serious as gunshot wounds, underscoring the role of moral shock in combat outcomes. The event also had operational consequences. Commanders reassessed prisoner handling procedures, particularly in areas of constrained terrain or low visibility. Escort formations were revised to ensure overlapping fields of fire, redundant oversight, and strict spacing, precautions designed to prevent a repeat of such rapid reversals. In post-action reports, this encounter was cited as a critical example of how a single misjudgment could lead to outsized consequences, influencing doctrine in the final months of the European theater. Ultimately, the incident reinforced a fundamental truth about warfare. Numbers and equipment matter, but experience, initiative, and acute situational awareness can determine outcomes in seconds. It was a lesson etched into both surviving witnesses and the historical record, a small but powerful testament to the lethal efficiency of a trained soldier operating in a moment of opportunity. The story of those 45 seconds now stands as a cautionary tale, a brief but potent illustration of underestimation, human instinct, and the unpredictable nature of combat. And from this aftermath, we turn to reflection, understanding why such moments resonate beyond statistics, shaping history, memory, and the human perception of war. 45 seconds can change lives, reputations, and even the perception of an entire battlefield. In the frozen winter of 1945, a single soldier's decisive actions demonstrated that underestimation carries a cost far greater than miscalculation in tactics or firepower. It was not luck, nor mere chance. It was preparation, experience, and the cold clarity of instinct meeting opportunity. History often remembers battles in terms of numbers, territorial gains, or political significance. Yet moments like this reveal the human dimension of warfare, how one individual, trained and alert, can alter events that seem predetermined by force or strategy. The psychological imprint left on those who witnessed it underscores an enduring truth. War is never only about machines, formations, or doctrines. It is about perception, judgment, and the relentless consequences of human error. Technologically, the weapons used were standard for the period, yet their effectiveness depended entirely on the hands guiding them. The event emphasizes that tools amplify ability, but do not replace it. Leadership, training, and presence of mind remain decisive factors, particularly in moments compressed by time and constrained by environment. Chaos magnifies skill, hesitation magnifies danger. This episode also resonates morally and philosophically. In the midst of large-scale conflict, individuals can assert agency, even under extreme duress. The prisoner, underestimated and surrounded, transformed vulnerability into action. Such episodes remind us that history is shaped not only by grand strategies, but by fleeting, intense decisions, where seconds and choices intersect with destiny. Ultimately, the lesson endures. In war, as in life, assumptions can be lethal. Respect for preparation, situational awareness, and the potential of every individual is essential. The frozen road, the stunned soldiers, and the 45 seconds of concentrated intensity are more than a story. They are a testament to the lethal precision of human skill and the enduring truth that underestimation is often the precursor to disaster. And as we close this chapter of history, one fact remains clear. Legends are born in the smallest moments, and the quiet, icy roads of winter 1945 still echo with the lessons of those fleeting, decisive seconds.